Today's actually a really cool one. Dean is at the truck show. We're going to find out all about his Super Pete, Badass Pete. We're going
That
to
is
talk
not,
data.
yes,
We're going to
guys,
talk
that's not a
how
background. That is a real truck.
truck. Yes. We're going to talk how to interpret the data because it's great that we have data. It's great that we have all this data at our fingertips. But how do we interpret it so we can actually use it in our sales?
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
All right, here we go. So,
Hey,
Lisa,
yeah.
good morning. She's
Hey,
there already. Look
hey.
at her.
Oh, is Lisa there already? Yeah, of
Oh,
course she
yeah.
is. What are we talking about? What are we saying? Of course she is. So, Dean, I'd really like to start
Yes.
with some of the comments we were just talking about off air because
right.
for those of you who don't know, Dean jumped in his Pete. Now, I got a question for you before we even go there. So that video you put on LinkedIn last week, is that your Pete
The
that was getting all buffed and shined and
that
everything?
was mine. Yep. It was in the shop
Yeah.
getting
Now, was
this.
that you doing it?
No, a guy called Benny Rosa does that for me. That's like $1,000 weekend right there just to polish the stainless. It's such an
wow.
art. It's such a
But
skill polish.
my Lord, what a
Yeah.
difference. Like when you
Yeah.
went
Wow.
into your rims on the before and after, I was like,
Yeah.
holy crap, like
But
before and
then,
then after it's a mirror. And I'm like,
but
oh.
that's what winter does with the calcium that they spray on the roads, right?
Yeah.
Your stainless steel just gets eaten away and pitted badly,
Destroyed.
and these rims are 22 years old, so they're kind of pitted pretty badly. He did a great job. Like the stainless makes all the difference. Trucks go better
Oh
when
yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, exactly. So share with us the realization, and maybe for those that might not have been on some of the shows where you kind of explained your background,
Right.
share with share with us your background and then what you realized on your trip to the truck show.
Yeah, I grew up in trucks in Australia, right? So it's been in my blood, my entire life, ever since Dad didn't make us, but it got us to drive vehicles around the farm. So we didn't need much encouragement. Dad was always trying to hide the car keys and the truck keys because he knew we'd just jump in it and take off. We did put a Beverly Hillbillies wagon we built into the dam one day. Like we drove it straight into the dam. It was like we built like we were watching Beverly Hillbillies as a kid. We actually built one of those vehicles that Granny and Jed used to ride on.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
oh yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Oh,
we
yeah. I
couldn't,
know
we
exactly.
couldn't drive to save ourselves, so we ended up getting out of control and just straight up into the dam. It was pretty funny. So, but we grew up in trucks, and I just love trucks all my life. I've worked in all sorts of jobs in the trucking industry. But most of the time, probably about 20, 25 years in driving. That's where the millions of miles come from. And that was what we were talking about after the show. Now, I always wanted to have a Peterbilt when I moved to America, and I've ended up, got a Peterbilt show truck now that used to be a Werner Enterprises fleet truck. And what you're looking at is the interior of the truck where bunk beds used to be, because this used to be a team truck running cross country. But it's sort of retired these days, and it's enjoying a leisurely life going to truck shows. But it's not so leisurely when you've got to drive a long trip, right? So I'm ELD exempt. I don't do more than 8 trips a month, but I just carry a paper log just for the heck of it. And what struck me, I did 670 miles on Sunday, right? And it kind of struck me that how soft I was, how out of touch I was, because like 700 miles is like basic table stakes in Australia, where I did most of my driving, because you can drive 14 hours a day on duty. Here you can only work 11. But the first thing that struck me is that, we have 11 hours on duty, then 3 others. So your work day is 14 hours. That's almost double the work day of the average worker. Mm-hmm. Just right there, right? So a trucker's work day can span 14 hours legally. That is a long period of time to be vigilant, driving the vehicle, watching for everybody else, because you've got to drive for everybody else on the roads these days. But what was really interesting was just how much for granted we take miles, drivers' ability to do miles. And we talk about average miles per tractor week of maybe, some big fleets, if they can get 2,000 miles a week out of their trucks, they're pretty happy. Other owner operators can run 3,000 to 3,500 miles a week. And I think when you're selling capacity, a truck's not a truck, right? Depends, if you're buying capacity from a large fleet that are speed limited, you're probably going to get maybe 350, 400 miles a day. If you're buying capacity from a small fleet owner operator, you're probably going to get 600 miles a day. And that's a huge difference in terms of how that affects the rate.
Yes.
Now, I know in the logistics and broking world, the speed of the truck doesn't come into the calculation, does it? But
it doesn't, but it should.
It should, exactly, yeah.
You can run
for the amount of time it takes, yeah.
A lot of your fleets are run, at speed limited at 62 to 65 kilometers an hour, right? For fuel savings and safety and, litigation and all those liability, all those sorts of things.
Miles, right? Not kilometers, miles.
Sorry, yeah. So if you're speed limited at 65, you're at a natural disadvantage to the smaller fleets that aren't speed limited at 65. If I can run 75, I can run 75 in 13 states legally, right? If I can run 70 in another 14 states legally. So if I'm running 10 miles every hour and I work 10 hours, I'm 100 miles ahead of where a fleet truck is that's speed limited. And in terms of that may make the difference between getting unloaded and reloaded. It may give me the ability to be headed
do an extra trip a week.
1 day trip, 2 day trip. Yeah.
Right. So it just, it's sort of, when you sit and drive for hours, you kind of think about stuff. And what had occurred to me was how much we in the non-driving side of the industry take for granted a driver's, requirement to run miles, because it's actually really hard to do and be vigilant and, concentrate and think and be responsive and respectful and polite and courteous, all those things. And do that hour on hour on hour, and then back up and do it the next day after sleeping in a terrible truck stop. We were talking. We had a guest on our show a few weeks ago, and we were talking about driver health, about making good choices when you go to a truck stop, right? So I go to all the effort. I pull into a truck stop on I-70 South in Ohio. I thought I'll just go in and have a sit at a Pilot. I'll go in, sit down, have breakfast, make some good choices. All they had was Taco Jimmy's something. That was it. There was nowhere to sit.
They didn't have biscuits and gravy?
Nothing. There was one place. And I thought, no wonder it's hard to get good choices. Now, maybe this is a artifact of the pandemic and how we've changed all of our truck stops. But so that was my trip down here. It's about 1,000 miles from Boston. We're here at everybody. What's interesting, Dan, DJ, is there's been trucks here since Sunday in the prep lot. Judging doesn't start till tomorrow, Thursday. So I've been here for 4 days already, polishing, cleaning, waxing. That's after polishing, cleaning, waxing, buffing the week before. Because as every trucker will tell you, as soon as you wash your truck, it's guaranteed to rain. Let me tell you a quick story. I left Sunday morning. I got up, wrote my weekly update, did all my market analysis for DAT, left home I was waiting for the roads to dry because it rained overnight. I had to wait till the sun came up, the dew point to drop. And I thought I'd timed it perfectly, and I took off at 9 o'clock Sunday. And by the time I got out of Boston, the roads were still damp and my truck was filthy, and it rained all the way to Albany. So, I'll be washing and polishing again today to get ready for judging tomorrow. But they go to a point where they say, rags down and judging starts and you can no longer touch your truck. So serious table stakes. Do you want me to just show you what's around me here?
Yeah.
Yes,
Let's see, for sure.
So these are some of the trucks in front. We're all lined up here. These are some pretty nice trucks. I'm not sure if all of them work, but if you can look in the mirror.
What do you mean by all of them work? They just got towed there?
No, they drove here.
Oh, you mean work like in fleets? Oh, got it. Got it. Okay.
And that's the interior of.
Did you see in the mirror? There's a bunch of trucks behind them.
Yeah.
You can see. Yeah. You can see in the mirror there.
Holy cow!
This guy next to us has got a Smokey and the Bandit set up here. His dog's called Cletus.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there's a lot of cool. And the big expo halls over the back where there's thousands of exhibitors. DAT's got a big booth about 200 yards to my right. So tomorrow and Thursday will be pretty big days for the industry. This is the first time. This is the 50th anniversary of the Mid-America Truck Show. It hasn't been on since they got the pandemic cancelled, the 2021. So it's a pretty big deal to be back out traveling. And it actually was really good driving down, just realizing that we're all back out traveling again. And things are somewhat normal.
Dean, you mentioned something that I don't think very many people think about,
Right.
and that is, being vigilant the
Right.
entire time. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, when we look at it, right? I mean, I'm sure everyone watching, listening, whether it be now or on the podcast later, has seen a car cut in front of a truck
Oh,
and the truck have to slam on the brakes, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Have seen some, I mean, listen, they've also seen some truckers
Yeah.
that have done some pretty stupid things.
Yep.
When I say that, I mean it with all due respect, because I've been in the position
Yep.
where I've been driving down the road and on a snowmobile crossing,
Mm.
we meet eyes and the snowmobile goes.
Mm.
And I'm slamming on my brakes in the middle of a winter storm, sliding all over the place. My son
Right.
looks at me and goes, "What the hell's wrong with that person?"
Yeah.
I go, sometimes people just have a brain fart.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
done it where you've been at a stop sign and somebody goes to walk across and you just
We're
go and
human.
you stop yourself. You're like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." Or, like we've all been in that position, but I think when it happens to us, we don't think of it.
Yeah.
And, you said something that really shifted even my perspective. And I've been in a truck. I've got my license. I've done tons of team trips, not for probably over a decade and a half, but I've done them. 14 hours,
Yeah.
11 hours driving, 14 hours on where you're watching everything around you. That drains you. Like, and it's not as if they're making $600,000 a year because they're working double the time we work.
Right.
That it goes back to that driver centric positioning and like, how do we, and the second part of this is you said something really interesting. So you got to a truck stop, which would normally, like a pilot is a big, well-known truck stop.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, at this point in life, at this point in health, at this point in nutrition,
Right.
where we know what's good, what's bad, what's indifferent.
Yep.
They haven't adopted to this. Like I remember when I went on trips, biscuits and gravy like came with its own defibrillator. And when you would eat biscuits and gravy, for all of those, everyone in America knows biscuits and gravy,
Right.
but like you would almost have to shock your heart after just to keep going for the day, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking also, 15, 20 years ago. And so they're not changed at all, or some, or
I think it's different across some chains, and I think drivers, have their favorite spots they go to where they know. I hadn't been on that road forever, so I made the fatal mistake of pulling in there, and next thing,
Yes.
and here's the problem though: when you pull in and you make the effort to stop, you've already eaten up 20 minutes. Right, 20 minutes is gone. So if you're having your half-hour break in within your 8 hours, you can't just say, "Oh, I'll just drive over the road," or I'll just drive somewhere else, because then there's another half hour gone. So once you're there, you're kind of caught and you can't do too much about it. So it's but
another interesting point.
The average driver in this country, if you look at fleet data, is running about 7 hours. So they're not running the full 11. There's a lot of productivity lost, and that's got to do with traffic and weather and inexperience, and also the other delays that we're talking about from roadworks. Like it's construction season now. There's roadworks everywhere. So. But
they're still vigilant. Like even in traffic, and if they're stuck in traffic, they're still vigilant. They're still shifting. Well, unless they got an automatic truck, but they're still shifting gears. They're still watching, people coming around them, cars trying to cut them off, cars trying to sneak in. They're looking for to prepare their next move. So there's still that vigilance, that mental brain power that chews calories in our body, right? And then you can't replenish those calories in an effective and nutritious way. I mean, it all adds up.
It's good, and it's going to it's dangerous too. It's just
I mean, just being awake is like a cordless battery being held on consistently, right? It eventually wears out, and sleep recharges the battery.
Yeah.
But we've all got different sleep requirements. But I think, Dan, the thing that I always say in my head, car drivers instinctively see a truck and pull out in front of it because they are scared to death of being caught behind it. The one thing you can count on at an intersection anywhere, if a car driver sees you coming, they are going to pull out in front of you 9 times out of 10. And it's so, Lisa asked, how can we raise awareness? I just think people just need to realize that trucks they take a lot longer to slow down, speed up, and brake. Like you've just got to give trucks a much bigger gap, like give them a much wider berth. It's a totally different
Ryan says, I've been reading there's a crackdown on drivers
we kind of talked
sleep
about this,
apnea and are being denied CDLs because of how fatal it could be.
Yeah, so I mean, this is not a new thing. Sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea, has been on the docket for decades. Sleep apnea is essentially where the airways block off. You're gasping for air. You're gasping for air during your sleep.
I had sleep apnea huge. I had it bad when I was 250 pounds. I had sleep apnea extreme.
Well, so it starts with, we put weight on from the bottom up. So we get a spare tire. Next thing we get here, and it's the weight around the neck that adds to the collapsibility of the upper airway. So snoring is not nasal. Snoring is the soft palate flapping in the throat. Apnea is where it blocks off, and you got to gasp for air to wake up and start the heart again. Why it's fatal, Ryan, is because that gasp for air is like firing a shotgun of blood through your veins at 100 miles an hour, and it dislodges the fatty tissue and causes strokes. So one of the symptoms of sleep apnea are heart attacks and strokes. And a lot of people have both of those, but they're not connected to obstructive sleep apnea. And the reason I know so much, my father died of his second heart attack after having obstructive sleep apnea, who his entire life as a truck driver and was never diagnosed, but self-medicated every day with cigarettes and alcohol. And if you everybody, I see him across the entire planet. Truck drivers are doing the same thing every single day because they're in bed for 8 hours, but they're not sleeping. They never get into deep sleep. Their oxygen saturation is way down. They have, their memory, their brain, their head hurts. The fatigue symptoms are just debilitating. So yes, it's a big deal, and it's got to do with your neck size. So I've just had my CDL physical. They're doing blood pressure, neck size, body fat composition. If your neck size is greater than 18 inches, 1/8, that's one of the predisposing factors for obstructive sleep apnea, and you will be sent for a sleep study almost immediately and get a reduced DOT physical card down to 3 months until you get better.
I've been there. I have a big neck. My wife says I'm like a turtle because I got no neck. I just kind of go from head to shoulders. And we rented the ice one day at Christmas. Christmas Eve, we normally rent the ice, have a big hockey game for like all the neighborhood and stuff. And caught an edge one day. Just took my daughter out kind of on a last skate, caught an edge, hit my head. So I go to the hospital because I'm puking. I'm like a violent concussion. And they put this neck brace on me, and it was like small, medium, large. And then the last setting was called no neck. And they put it on, and I'm on the no neck setting. And of course, I mean, like that was just a riot for the family. But it was, that's hilarious. You before understanding some of these concepts, it was always, I'd always, placed sleep apnea with overweight, unhealthy. Right. And I can remember in one of the best conditions I've ever been in, I stopped breathing in my sleep to the point where my wife made me go have a test, and I had bad sleep apnea. And, of course, at that point in time in my life, my ego was everything. I'm like, I don't fucking have sleep apnea, not a friggin' chance. Yeah. And I remember sitting with the doctor, and the doctor's going, okay, listen, you have sleep apnea. And I looked at him, and I went, and I threw the paperwork down. I go, we're leaving. And I said, I'm never snoring again. And I don't know. I'm sleeping, so I don't know if I snore. But but it was it's one of these things where I'm seriously in debate now to go and get the machine and all that, just because I've heard so many good things from people going, oh my gosh, like you don't understand what sleep is until you. It's just I can't get it. I just can't get over that.
Listen, it's so true. So I had huge tonsils. Besides being overweight, I had huge tonsils. Right. And so I ended up finally having them removed. They kept fighting. I had to have it removed as an adult. I can tell you, once you're not dealing with sleep apnea, Dan, you have energy the next, like it feels like your day is draining every day when you have sleep apnea. Like you never have energy. Once I was able to actually sleep and not I mean, Maggie was having to wake me up all the time, but yeah, once she didn't have to do that and I could sleep, oh my God, what a difference.
So do you have the machine now, DJ?
I didn't have to get the machine or anything. I just by having my tonsils taken out and losing weight,
Did you see the comment from Nerve here? I have sleep crapnea. It's called having 3 kids under 3. That'll do it to you.
I have that now too.
Nerf, I haven't seen you in ages, brother. How you doing, man? I like that. That's good. I hope you're good, buddy. It's interesting.
it's such a hard life for truckers, right? So when you think about capacity and why drivers quit this industry so much, why truckload turnover is sort of in that 80 to 100% range. It's such a hard, lonely existence because you're on your own all the time. So I think that if people said, what can we do to make a difference? Just try and be more personal. Like it's just not like because I've had 10 hours off, I can just run 11 and get that load delivered. There's a whole lot of personal emotion that goes with it. Got to make better human connections. I think we don't do a very good job of that, even as dispatchers. Dispatchers don't have a lot of time. They've got 50 drivers to deal with on a load board every day. It's hard for them to say to the driver, how are you? How are you feeling? Did you get enough sleep last night? Very, very difficult industry.
Mm-hmm. And you said something else that I think is critical when it comes to understanding the mindset.
Yep.
You had a lot of time to think.
Right.
Yes.
And I remember my snowmobile trip with my son every day for 6 days, 8 or 10 hours on the sled.
Right.
A lot of thinking happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not the best thinking. And you think a driver goes in, gets like treated like garbage, then gets cut off, then this, and they've got like 10 hours to think about it.
Right.
And then they get to the shipper receiver, and now they've almost placed themselves like physiologically, they've placed themselves in this mood. And then now, because again, even today, they don't get treated the best when they arrive at shippers or receivers, and they're there with your product to help you achieve the goals you need. Like if you went and bought this product or raw material to make your product, that truck that's bringing it is an essential part of you and your company making money. But let's just treat them like crap because it's tier job. Like it's it drives me fucking nuts.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Dan. So anybody who is listening, anybody with road rage, who just has road rage from being on the street for a half hour because they did a quick commute, or even an hour or two, think of the drivers who have to be on the road for 11 hours after being treated like trash after receiver or shipper where they just came from. And now keep them in mind.
Have you ever been cut off on the way to work? Or something happens on the way to work on the highway, and for hours you like rage about it at work, and that's one instance. Imagine and you got off the road 20 minutes later, right? Like, I've
got you can't show it to you, but I got 5 cast iron train horns under the chassis. In addition,
no,
they're my attention getters.
I bet.
Regular air horns up here are kind of so what. But if you cut in front of me, I will peel the paint off your car with my cast iron.
I was just going to ask, Dean, what makes 5?
Where the guy turns on in the Italian Job where he turns on the speakers and blows the clothes on.
You'll blow the back window out of somebody's vehicle. You know what? I guarantee you, Dean, somebody pulls in front of you and does that, and you lay on those, you are going to literally like open their sphincter and everything's going to fall out. They're going to be so scared.
First thing he's looking for a train.
They're thinking a train came from nowhere. Hilarious.
Lisa says, do trucking companies have positions or roles to work on improving their drivers' experiences if the dispatchers don't have the capacity to do it?
So it's a great question, Lisa. One of the things I did when I worked at Omnitrax Analytics, we recognized that one of the problems drivers had was dealing with dispatchers. For dispatchers, it's an entry-level job, and it's really stressful, and they want to get out of there as fast as they can. So it's very hard to have a stable work environment where the dispatcher's always wanting to move out and the driver's quitting. You never get a solid group of people building relationships across the board. So in this one company, we work for one of the largest truckload carriers. We raised the entry pay of the dispatcher to make it no longer an entry-level job. We made the pay so good, people wanted to go and work there. So we stabilized the turnover of the DMs. And then here's what we did, Lisa, that was absolutely counterintuitive. We reduced the number of drivers per driver manager because they were up around 48. We reduced it down to 35. So what do you think happens when you've got fewer drivers to deal with?
You spend more time with them.
Spend more time with the ones that need the help the most. Because there's only 10 to 12% of the drivers you really need to manage more closely every day. There's a whole lot of drivers you can just let go on their own. But what happened was the cost saving from more driver managers and more pay came through higher productivity, fewer accidents, lower turnover. And you might say that's and that was counterintuitive when we recommended it, but we did the modeling and it actually works out really well. So Lisa, yes, companies do have, you remember truckload carriers are very lean. They don't have a lot of staff that are dealing with these sorts of things every day. It's primarily the driver manager. And then there's another default level with the safety manager if there's a safety issue. Generally, it's pretty scattergun. They kind of have a, let's try and hit everybody at the same time with the same message, when in reality, only a handful of your drivers really need your attention. And there's a lot of other drivers who can just get the job done with no fuss. So for driver manager is the best way to go with this.
And
well, and that's where we can make the difference too. I mean, we make the difference too.
Well, 100%. And especially if you're like reversing the whole logistics engineered program and you're starting with a driver-centric sale, right? Like, and we've talked about this many times on the show, both with Dean and on different shows, DJ, where as a sales rep, if we're designing the business to fit our driver and the lifestyle of our drivers, everybody along that chain is always going to be happy. It's like you go into a customer and if you help the customer's customer win, your customer always wins, right? It's simple. You just go one step past the line. So instead of going in and selling and saying, okay, here's my profit, and that's the concern, it's okay. Here is the driver, the one that's actually doing the work, the Marine that's digging the trenches. That's what we should be concerned about, in my opinion. And if you say, okay, what do you have for the driver? Sorry, Dean, go.
If using data, if you build your whole network around making a driver-centric, model, you'll find all the capacity you can ever need.
Right?
It's really, and that sounds counterintuitive, but drivers, at their very essence, drivers are creatures of habit. Right, and what they don't like is having change and disruption. Right.
Yes.
If you can give it, because the driver's always thinking multiple loads at a time. They're not like in the broker transactional world where a broker's working on one load. The carrier's always saying, well, what about when I get there? What about the next load? And how do I get home Saturday? So it's multidimensional. That's how a driver thinks. But if you can build your whole freight network around individual drivers, let drivers build their own schedules, you'd be amazed how much more freight you can get moved.
Yeah, and it's funny because it goes to the whole digital brokerage scene, where there's a lot of people right now talking where, if you want to be a salesperson in logistics, your best place to start is a digital brokerage because you see the visual map of if a truck takes a load here, what do we have for them to go here and then back? And what's that, the typical triangle that drivers want. And, Dean, from a counterintuitive part, I remember when I first discovered the power of like a real reverse engineered logistics, right? Typically in logistics brokerage, we start with the customer, we find the customer, then we hope to God we find a carrier to meet that need. If we reverse that and we go to our carriers and then sell for them and become their sales force, you have all the capacity you can ever want. And really, when you think about it, you need 30 to 50 trucks. Right. Because if you have 30 to 50 trucks of suppliers, even one company where you say, okay, I'm going to start selling for you in a very short period of time, you can have 100 loads a week because each truck averaging 2 loads a week, whatever. Sometimes if it's short haul, maybe it's 3. So maybe you got, 300 loads, but that volume can drastically increase. Know your numbers, your capacity limits, your times, everything.
And you started with the most crucial part, which is the truck, the carrier.
Well, and DJ, when you think about time, right? So when we think about our time these days, like John Brewer was on, and he says 60% of my day is filled with shit I never had to do before. Yes. So now we it's not like they were sitting around for 60% of their day before the issues happened. It's now they've added to it. So when you have somebody live, when somebody's on the phone with you, it is a mandate today more than ever. Move that needle as much as possible. So if you understand your capacity, you understand your numbers, you understand all of it, in one phone call, you can qualify out. In one phone call, you can jump 3 or 4 steps in your sales sequence. It is massively powerful. Massive, because you have all your information. It's not, hey, DJ, can you get me a rate? Okay, perfect. DJ goes, gets the rate, comes back. My phone's ringing. I'm off on another venture. A week later, we get back a hold of each other. And it's like, who are you again? Because I've had 700 phone calls in that week. You know what I mean? Like, it's so powerful. And then not to mention, you're helping a company retain drivers because you're thinking about them.
Right.
Yes.
And remember I said drivers are creatures of habit. They love familiarity. And if you have a driver delivering the same freight to the same customer week in, week out, guess what happens to your customer service levels and your cargo
skyrocket.
Yeah.
Skyrockets. Now, I know we were supposed to talk data and how to interpret it today, Dean. So maybe, maybe we'll put that on tap next week where we'll get a couple of different lanes because,
I could summarize what's happening because we're in the most tumultuous of times.
Yes.
Freight rates have plummeted. Dry van rates plummeted last week. So diesel's gone up and rates have come down. Who would have thought that, right? So rates have come down. Dry van rates have absolutely crashed through the floor last week. They dropped 13 cents a mile last week. 13 cents a mile. They're down 25 cents a mile in the last month, down to 243. Why that's a big deal, Dan, as we think about selling capacity, carriers' operating costs have absolutely gone through the roof. So with diesel at $5.15, this time last year, a carrier was making 60 cents a mile gross profit. With rates down to 243 and diesel up to 5.15, it's now down to 18 cents per mile. Their gross profit has dropped 70% in the last few weeks. Their gross profit per mile. So if you think about spot market capacity, we're about to see a lot of spot market capacity either evaporate or truckload carriers in the spot market move back to contract freight. A lot of independent contractors might go back to being leased on to a larger carrier. We'll see a couple of things. One is a shift in capacity back to the larger fleets and contract. Worst case scenario, we see a lot of bankruptcies like we did in 2019 because this margin compression of rates down, fuel up is going to really hurt a lot of the capacity that you've been looking for in the spot market in particular. Shippers are starting to pull back a lot of LTL part loads, consolidate into more truckload volumes. So because we've had inflated demand, because people have been sending part loads as fast as they can, shippers, because of higher interest rates and inventory holding costs, are tightening up. They're going to send fewer loads now because it's costing a lot more per load. And you're going to see less volume. We're already seeing that happen right now in the market. So we're in the middle of a major shift in the freight market that we didn't see coming this soon. We knew it had turned, but it's turned dramatically in the last week. So my weekly report's out last night, got all the numbers and the data in there at dat.com/market update. It's got all the data in there for each of the equipment types, but major market correction last week.
Wow.
Interesting. And
now, Dean,
you were saying that whole 31% fuel.
Yes,
and
I was going to say, what is that number at? Is that
the EIA number is $5.15. It dropped 13 cents this week. So the national average was $5.13 per gallon.
And what would that equate to when you're talking? Because I know we were talking where, typically fuel was 25% of the rate, and that's kind of what you average. But when it goes up to 31, that's when everything happens. So where are we now? Are we at that 33 because we dropped 13 on one end? And
so remember, 2019 we were at 32%. That's when we had massive bankruptcies in Q2. In 2020, it was 19% because diesel was so low. Last year, it was 24%. Wait for it. Year to date, 36%. We are 4%. We are 4 points higher than where we were in 19. And
when everybody was going bankrupt.
Yeah. Now the thing was, in 19, it was sustained. It was sustained. This is a up and down. So what we've got to watch is how quickly the correction comes back down. But retail prices are slow to drop, right?
Yeah. Nefaric says rates are way down. I'm now paying $17,000 from Texas to Quebec compared to $25,000 last month.
Yeah. Capacity is
$25K, brother.
Yeah.
Holy crap, man! Somebody had you by the short and curlies. Jeepers.
It might have been a nice big truck like this one.
He thought 30.8, Dean. He said, "Oh shit."
Yeah. No, 36%.
That's
so we're talking percentage of rate.
Yeah. So 36%. Diesel's 36% of operating costs. It needs to be at 25% to be profitable long term, right? 25% is where you need to be to stay in business. Diesel is one of your biggest operating costs, and right now, if you're running one truck, 110,000 miles a year, finance, etc., etc. Operating costs have gone up 20 cents a mile in the last year. We're about $2 a mile now to run a single truck and trailer. It's a costly exercise. When you start to bring rates down to that 240 level, you're starting to get into margin compression territory that forces people to make really difficult decisions. And I think a lot of the capacity we've been seeing that, have been running for loads for 25 grand a year, a load to Texas that Nerf's talking about, I just hope those carriers have been putting some money away for that rainy day because it's here.
And that's another topic, and maybe we'll get onto it another day because we're running out of time. But, the whole jumping contract spot market, you look at it during seasonal shifts like produce season and all that, where, you have a lot of business out of California, and instead of sitting down and saying, okay, hey, like, how do we do this all year round where you're not going to bail on me during produce and then expect the business back?
What'll happen now, Dan? This is where shippers have got to be very careful, because they'll be onto you guys in the sales world to drive the rate down by going to the spot market. So they'll smell blood in the water right now. Remember, shippers have had 6 quarters of double-digit rate increases. The worst thing they could do is jump the other direction and drive the market down, because then we're back in that cyclical boom crash, capacity evaporates, then it comes back. What they've got to do is be a little bit more realistic and try and work with the capacity through the downside and the upside. So work with carriers and say, you've got to, obviously rates have come down, but we know diesel's high. So work with your capacity, because the capacity will stick with you if you build those relationships through the good times and the bad. But
and now's the time, if you have not started building relationships with carriers, now's the time to build it. We've had probably one of the most difficult times to build relationships with carriers as brokers over the past year, call it, because a lot of carriers, and sorry, let me rephrase, the ones that I've spoken to about, hey, like, what's the feeling when a broker comes to you to build relationships? It's, oh, well, they're coming to me now because they need me. When things switch, we'll see if they're still there.
Yeah.
Kind of scenario. Like there's that vibe between, supplier and carrier. And so, as a broker, my suggestion, if you heard what Dean just said, is go to your customers now and say, hey, FYI, these things are happening in the market. What I'd like to do is now implement a full press strategy to make sure next time something happens, we mitigate those double-digit rate increases because we're consistent across the board. And part of me says, if you're an asset-based, that consistency matters. Because during high times, sure, you might not make, you might be 5-10 points lower, but in a time like this, you're 5-10 points higher. And if you're just consistent across the board and the focus is on real value, helping customers achieve goals, like, I don't know, part of me says, you stop jumping to the spot market, because
exactly.
Well, because you're building more consistency. The thing too is we touch on what Dean talked about, and we as brokers talk with our suppliers too about paying attention to their operating cost and where their fuel actually is, and what they're, are you at a danger point? What do we need to do? We gotta help them too. I think that's key.
Well, I mean, Navad, he has a very valid point, because a trailer that used to be 30,000 is upwards of 50, 60, even 70,000, depending how you spec it out, right? So costs have gone up. Like Dean, we've talked about driver wages; they've gone up. Like your cost to operate rolling steel has gone up quite a bit. So and I remember, Dean, when we talked a couple of shows ago, you said, Dan, rates will never go back to where they were. They will go down, but they'll never go back to where they were. And I think everybody's prepared for that. I think most customers, if they are not, then I think they, and I'll probably get a lot of backlash for this, but if you're not prepared for it, I think you got your head in the sand, because everything's like, our cost of living has risen. So if our cost of living has risen, everything along the lines have risen.
Everything.
And you look at that overall cost to purchase. Then you look at driver wages overall cost. Then you look at everybody inside the company's overall cost, like an entire company. You can't just raise driver pay. Your inflation and cost of inflation has to go up with every single person's salary in the company. So your overall costs go up. Then, your interest rates go up, and then all these other things. rates will never come down to where they were.
No.
But I guess the big question is, Dean, and I don't even know if I'd love your thoughts on it, is like, are we into a compressed margin across the board in order to make things more consistent?
No, remember 80% of the freight at the moment's moving on contract rates that are up substantially year over year. Mm-hmm. So, the 20% of the volume that moves on the spot market, what you typically see when contract rates are high is that sucks volume out of the spot market, because carriers, the capacity in the spot market will migrate towards higher paying contract rates that are more consistent, right? So they won't be chasing that spot market volatility of, massive rates one direction and hardly anything the other direction, because it's a head haul, back haul, origin destination pairing. So what we'll see, I think, is more volume moving back to contract, more stable margins, more consistent volumes, and less of the volatility in the spot market. The volatility in the spot market's what attracted hundreds of thousands of new carriers over the last few years into the market because of the record high rates. We're a fragmented bunch in that small carrier group, right? They're not cohesive, but they're very flexible. They can go anywhere, anytime, for any rate. When that market stabilizes, those carriers shift. They either shift out of the industry or they go back to working for larger carriers.
Interesting. Until the next shift, when the spot market's worth more, and then they do it again.
It's a market, so it's always up and down. It's always.
I just say one thing: if shippers encourage you to drive the rate down, that drives capacity out of the industry, and then overall capacity tightens again, and rates go up. Yeah. Right? So it's a cycle. You've got to be very careful.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Nirvad just said, I sold one of my trailers for $34,000 and it's 8 years old. Holy crap. Yeah. We've got simply because demand is high, supply is low. Yeah, 100%. And then Eric says, thank you, Steamship Line. Awesome. Dean, thanks for coming again, brother. Man, and you know what? I'm so glad you did this from the truck show. I think it's super cool. Yes, I love the whole blacked out look you got going in your truck. I think it's sweet, man.
Yep. It's
and you know what, Dean, I got to tell you, you have a smile on your face and an energy about you today. We can tell I think
you missed being in the truck. Yeah.
It's Sirius XM. I got my Peterbilt. It's like this is my man cave.
That takes you 10 hours to buff and shine.
Another 10 hours today. I'll get sunburned again today for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, enjoy it, my friend. Thank you so much again. Right. DJ, what quote do you have to bring us out of here, brother?
I got a good one, Robert Kiyosaki today. But thank you, everybody, again for joining us. Thank you, Dean, for joining us every Wednesday and all of your amazing knowledge. This week, tomorrow, Go for No, Andrea Waltz. Don't miss us, guys. It's going to be amazing. Like and subscribe down below. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Sales Chatter Live, or if you follow us up in the corner somewhere, you'll see our LinkedIns. I see a few people on LinkedIn. You could follow me or Dan to see when we're live next. Robert Kiyosaki to take us out. Your future is created by what you do today, not tomorrow.
Right.
Start today. Do it today.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information.